My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at 28 years old, I thought I was living my fairy tale. The morning of my wedding to David Chen, I stood in my childhood bedroom, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold through the lace curtains my grandmother had sewn decades ago. My wedding dress hung on the back of the door, a vision in ivory silk that had taken months to perfect. In just 6 hours, I would walk down the aisle of St. Mary's Cathedral, surrounded by 200 of our closest family and friends, to marry the man I had loved for 4 years. What I didn't know was that in 3 hours, I would collapse on the marble floor of the church vestibule, and the blood test results that arrived moments later would shatter everything I believed about my perfect life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. If you've ever discovered a truth so devastating, it changed everything you thought you knew about yourself, tell us where you're tuning in from. I need to take you back to understand how I got to that moment, lying unconscious in my wedding dress while my entire world crumbled around me. Growing up in the small town of Millbrook, Connecticut, I was what everyone called the golden child. My parents, Robert and Catherine Mitchell, owned the town's most successful real estate agency, and our colonial house on Elm Street was the kind of place where neighbors stopped by for coffee, and the mailman knew everyone by name. I was valedictorian of my high school class, captain of the debate team, and the girl who organized charity drives and volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends. My younger sister Emma was 3 years behind me, and while I was the responsible one, she was the free spirit who painted murals on her bedroom walls and spent summers following indie bands across New England. Despite our differences, we were inseparable. Emma was my maid of honor, my best friend, and the only person who knew all my secrets. Or so I thought. I met David during my junior year at Boston University, where I was studying business administration, with plans to eventually take over my parents' company. He was in his first year of medical school, brilliant and driven, with the kind of quiet confidence that drew people to him without him even trying. Our first conversation happened in the university library, during finals week. I was stressed about an economics exam, surrounded by textbooks and empty coffee cups, when this guy with kind brown eyes and slightly messy black hair approached my table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice soft but clear. "I couldn't help but notice you've been here for about 8 hours straight. The library closes in 20 minutes, and I'm pretty sure you haven't eaten anything all day." He held up a granola bar and a bottle of water. Sometimes the brain needs fuel to function properly. I looked up from my notes, ready to politely decline, but something about his genuine concern stopped me. "How do you know I haven't eaten?" I asked, accepting the granola bar gratefully. "Because I've been watching you organize and reorganize those same 3 textbooks for the past hour," he said, with a small smile. "It's a classic stress behavior. I'm David, by the way, pre-med, which means I've become an expert in recognizing the signs of academic burnout." That conversation led to coffee the next day, which led to study sessions, which led to long walks around campus, discussing everything from medical ethics to our favorite childhood movies. David had grown up in San Francisco, the son of immigrants who had built a successful restaurant business from nothing. His parents, Helen and James Chen, had instilled in him the values of hard work, education, and family loyalty that resonated deeply with my own upbringing. What I loved most about David was how he balanced ambition with kindness. He worked harder than anyone I knew, pulling all-nighters in the medical library and volunteering at the free clinic downtown, but he never made me feel like I was competing for his attention. When I had a presentation that made me nervous, he would quiz me until I felt confident. When he had a particularly difficult rotation, I would bring him homemade soup and sit quietly while he studied, just so he wouldn't feel alone. Our relationship progressed naturally through college and into his medical school years. I graduated and started working at Mitchell & Associates, learning the real estate business from the ground up, while David completed his degree and began his residency in internal medicine at Boston General Hospital. The long hours and demanding schedule of medical training tested us, but we emerged stronger. I learned to cherish the quiet moments we stole together, and he learned to communicate even when exhausted, making sure I never felt forgotten or unimportant. When David proposed on a snowy December evening outside the library where we first met, I knew with absolute certainty that I wanted to spend my life with him. He had planned everything perfectly, from the hot chocolate waiting in a thermos, to the way the string lights reflected off the fresh snow. As I said yes through happy tears, I felt like I was stepping into the future I had always dreamed of. The engagement period was a whirlwind of planning and excitement. My mother threw herself into wedding preparations with the enthusiasm of someone who had been dreaming of this day since I was born. Emma helped me choose flowers, and tasted approximately 50 different cake samples with me, declaring each one better than the last. David's parents flew in from California multiple times to participate in the planning, and I grew to love Helen's gentle wisdom and James's terrible dad jokes. We decided on a June wedding at St. Mary's Cathedral, the same church where my parents had married 30 years earlier. The reception would be held at the Millbrook Country Club, overlooking the lake where David and I had shared our first kiss during one of his visits home with me. Every detail felt meaningful, from the roses that matched the ones in my grandmother's garden, to the string quartet that would play the same songs my parents had danced to at their wedding. David was in his second year of residency by then, which meant his schedule was still demanding but more predictable than during his first year. We had talked extensively about timing, and he assured me that he had arranged coverage for the wedding and honeymoon. His attending physician, Dr. Morrison, was supportive of residents maintaining work-life balance, and had personally signed off on David's time away. As the wedding approached, I threw myself into the final preparations with the same attention to detail that had served me well in business. I created spreadsheets for everything from the seating chart to the timeline for the day. I confirmed with vendors multiple times, had backup plans for potential weather issues, and even packed an emergency kit with everything from safety pins to antacid tablets. Looking back, I realize I was so focused on making sure every external detail was perfect that I missed the signs that something was wrong with the most important person in my life. David had always been driven and focused, but in the weeks leading up to the wedding, he seemed different. More distracted, more tired than usual, even for a resident. When I asked about it, he attributed it to stress from work and wedding planning. "It's just a lot happening at once," he would say, pulling me close. "Once we're married and settled, everything will calm down." I accepted his explanations because I wanted to believe them. I was dealing with my own stress from coordinating the wedding, while managing my increasing responsibilities at the family business. My father had been talking about retirement, and I was gradually taking on more client meetings and property negotiations. The pressure to prove myself worthy of eventually running the company added another layer of complexity to an already busy time. The week before the wedding, my extended family began arriving in Millbrook. My grandmother flew in from Florida, my cousins drove down from Vermont, and David's relatives made the cross-country trip from California. The house was full of laughter and conversation, with relatives I hadn't seen in years, catching up and sharing stories. Emma had taken time off from her job at an art gallery in Portland to help with last-minute preparations, and having her home made everything feel more real and special. David's bachelor party was scheduled for the Thursday before our Saturday wedding. His best man, Michael Rodriguez, had planned a low-key evening that would start with dinner at David's favorite restaurant and end with drinks at a sports bar. Nothing too wild, as David had to work a half shift the next day before officially starting his time off. I kissed him goodbye that evening, reminding him to pace himself and get some rest. My bachelorette party was Friday night, a sophisticated affair that Emma had organized perfectly. We started with dinner at the nicest restaurant in town, followed by drinks at a wine bar, and ended with movies and face masks at our house. It was exactly what I wanted, surrounded by my closest friends and family, celebrating this milestone in my life. As I fell asleep that night, I felt grateful and excited for what the next day would bring. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful, with temperatures in the perfect mid-70s range we had hoped for. I woke up naturally before my alarm, feeling surprisingly calm and rested, despite the magnitude of the day ahead. My mother was already up, quietly preparing breakfast for the extended family staying with us. The house smelled like coffee, and her famous blueberry muffins, scents that immediately made me feel grounded and loved. Emma appeared in my doorway, with 2 cups of coffee, one prepared exactly the way I liked it with a splash of vanilla creamer. "Good morning, bride," she said with a grin, settling onto my bed like we had done countless times throughout our childhood. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous but good nervous," I told her honestly, like standing at the edge of a diving board, before jumping into the deep end. "That's exactly how you should feel," she said, squeezing my hand. "You and David are perfect together. Today is going to be magical." We had scheduled my hair and makeup appointments to begin at 10, which would give us plenty of time to get ready without feeling rushed. The photographer would arrive at noon to capture getting ready photos, and we would leave for the church at 2 for photos before the 4 o'clock ceremony. Everything was planned to the minute, and I felt confident that the day would unfold smoothly. My hairstylist, Jenny Martinez, had been doing my hair since I was 16, and she arrived with her assistant and enough equipment to style hair for a Broadway production. She had perfected an elegant updo during our trial run, with soft curls framing my face and tiny pearl pins that had belonged to my grandmother scattered throughout. The makeup artist, recommended by Jenny, created a look that enhanced my natural features, while ensuring I would look radiant in photos. As the morning progressed, our house filled with the controlled chaos of wedding day preparation. Bridesmaids arrived with their dresses in excitement, my mother flitted between helping me and coordinating with vendors, and my father tried to stay out of the way, while obviously fighting back emotional moments. Emma, true to her artistic nature, documented everything with her vintage film camera, capturing candid moments that I knew would become treasured memories. Around 11:30, as Jenny was putting the finishing touches on my hair, my phone rang. The caller ID showed David's name, which surprised me since we had agreed not to talk on the morning of the wedding, following the tradition that it was bad luck for the groom to see or speak to the bride before the ceremony. Should I answer it? I asked Emma, who was helping the makeup artist organize her supplies. "Maybe he just wants to tell you he loves you," she said with a smile. "That's sweet." I answered the call, expecting to hear David's voice, telling me he couldn't wait to see me at the altar. Instead, I heard Michael's voice, and immediately knew something was wrong. "Sarah, it's Michael," he said, his tone careful and controlled. "I'm calling because David asked me to. He's not feeling well this morning, and he wanted me to let you know he might be a few minutes late getting to the church." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean he's not feeling well? What's wrong?" "He woke up with some stomach issues," Michael explained, though something in his voice didn't sound completely convincing. "Probably just nerves or something he ate last night. He's seeing if he can get something from the hospital to settle his stomach, and then he'll be fine. He just didn't want you to worry if he seemed rushed when he arrived." I felt a flutter of anxiety, but tried to rationalize it away. Pre-wedding nerves were normal, and David did have a sensitive stomach when he was stressed. "Is he okay though? Should I be worried?" No, he's fine," Michael assured me quickly. "He just wanted to give you a heads up. He said to tell you he loves you, and he'll see you at the altar." After I hung up, Emma noticed my concerned expression. "Everything okay? David's feeling a little sick," I told her. "Probably just wedding nerves." "That's totally normal," she said, though I caught a flicker of something in her eyes that might have been concern. "Remember when cousin Jessica's husband threw up twice before their ceremony? And they've been happily married for 8 years now." I nodded, trying to push away the uneasy feeling in my chest. David was a doctor. If something was seriously wrong, he would know how to handle it, and Mike would have sounded more concerned if it was anything serious. I forced myself to focus on the joy of the day and the excitement of marrying the man I loved. The photographer arrived right on schedule, a cheerful woman named Lisa, who immediately put everyone at ease with her warm personality and professional confidence. She had photographed several of my friends' weddings, and I trusted her completely to capture the day beautifully. She started with detail shots of my dress, shoes, and jewelry, then moved on to candid photos of the getting ready process. As I put on my dress with Emma's help, I felt a surge of emotion. The gown was everything I had dreamed of, fitted perfectly through the bodice with delicate lace sleeves, and a flowing skirt that made me feel like a princess. My grandmother's pearl necklace and my mother's diamond earrings completed the look, connecting me to the generations of strong women who had come before me. "You look absolutely stunning," my mother said, her eyes filling with tears as she saw me fully dressed for the first time. "Your father is going to cry when he sees you." "We all are," Emma added, already reaching for tissues. The next hour passed quickly, as we finished final preparations and took more photos. My bridesmaids looked beautiful in their dusty blue dresses, and my flower girl, Emma's 5-year-old daughter Lily, was adorable in her miniature version of my gown. Everything was coming together perfectly, and my earlier anxiety about David began to fade. At 1:45, we loaded into the decorated cars that would take us to the church. I rode with my father, who had been unusually quiet all morning. As we drove through downtown Millbrook, passing familiar streets and landmarks, he finally spoke. "Are you happy, sweetheart?" he asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "Yes, Dad," I answered without hesitation. "Really truly happy," he nodded, seeming satisfied with my response. "That's all that matters. You deserve every happiness in the world." St. Mary's Cathedral looked magnificent, decorated with white roses and greenery, exactly as I had envisioned. Guests were beginning to arrive, and I could see through the car window that the church was filling with the people we loved most. David's parents waved from the steps, and I felt a warm rush of affection for these wonderful people who would soon officially be my family. We had reserved the church's bridal suite for final preparations, a small but elegant room adjacent to the main sanctuary, where I could wait with my bridesmaids until it was time for the ceremony. As we settled in, Emma helped me touch up my lipstick, while the other bridesmaids arranged their bouquets and checked their hair one final time. "The church looks perfect," reported my cousin Ashley, who had peeked out to check on the decorations. "And it's packed. I think everyone in town is here." At 3:30, Father McKenna, who had baptized me as a baby and would now perform my wedding ceremony, stopped by to check on us. "You look radiant, Sarah," he said with the warm smile I remembered from my childhood. "Are you ready for this next chapter of your life?" "More than ready," I assured him, and I meant it completely. "David is here, and getting settled with his groomsmen," he added, and I felt relief wash over me. Whatever stomach issues he had been dealing with that morning were clearly resolved. At 3:50, Lisa positioned my father and me in the vestibule for final photos before I walked down the aisle. The church was full, with soft organ music playing and candles flickering throughout the sanctuary. Through the open doors, I could see David standing at the altar with Father McKenna and his groomsmen, looking handsome in his black tuxedo. My father offered me his arm, and I took a deep breath, feeling the magnitude of this moment settle over me. In just a few minutes, I would become Mrs. David Chen, beginning the life we had planned and dreamed about together. "Ready, princess?" my father asked, using the nickname he had called me since I was little. "Ready," I said, my voice strong and clear. The wedding coordinator gave us the signal, and the organist began playing the processional music. My bridesmaids had already made their way down the aisle, and now it was my turn. As the familiar notes of Pachelbel's canon filled the church, my father and I stepped through the doorway and began our walk toward my future. The sanctuary was even more beautiful than I had imagined, filled with flowers and loved ones, and the soft glow of afternoon sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. I could see David at the altar, and even from this distance, I could tell he was smiling. Everything was perfect, exactly as I had dreamed it would be. We were about halfway down the aisle when I began to feel strange. At first it was just a slight dizziness, which I attributed to the emotion of the moment, and the fact that I had barely eaten anything all day due to nerves. But as we continued walking, the feeling intensified, accompanied by a strange tingling sensation in my hands and feet. I squeezed my father's arm, trying to ground myself and push through whatever was happening. The music continued, and guests were rising to their feet as tradition dictated, their faces turned toward me with smiles and joy. But the dizziness was getting worse, and now I was having trouble focusing my vision. "Dad," I whispered, hoping he could hear me over the music. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately, his voice low but concerned. "I don't feel good," I managed to say, just as my knees began to buckle. Everything after that happened, very quickly, and yet seemed to unfold in slow motion. I felt my father's strong arms catch me as I started to fall, heard gasps from the congregation, and saw David running down the aisle toward me, his medical training overriding everything else.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The last thing I remembered before losing consciousness was the marble floor of the vestibule rushing up to meet me and the sound of Emma calling my name. When I woke up, I was lying on a couch in Father McKenna's office, still wearing my wedding dress but with my shoes removed and several concerned faces hovering over me. David was kneeling beside the couch, checking my pulse and looking at me with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't just concern for my physical well-being, it was something deeper and more complicated that I couldn't quite identify. "Sarah, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice gentle but professional. "What happened?" I asked, trying to sit up and immediately feeling dizzy again. "You fainted," he explained, gently pressing me back down. "I need you to stay lying down for a few more minutes until we figure out what's going on." My mother was there, looking pale and worried, and Emma was holding my hand tightly. Father McKenna stood nearby, and I could hear the murmur of confused voices from the sanctuary where our guests were waiting. "How long was I unconscious?" I asked. "About 10 minutes, David said, still in doctor mode. "Sarah, I need to ask you some questions. Have you been feeling sick lately? Any nausea, fatigue, changes in appetite?" The question seemed strange and clinical for my wedding day, but I tried to focus and answer honestly. "I've been tired, but I thought it was just from wedding stress and work. And I've been a little nauseous in the mornings, but again I figured it was nerves." I saw David and my mother exchange a look that I couldn't interpret, and a cold feeling began to settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with physical illness. "Sarah," David said carefully, "when was your last period?" The question caught me completely off guard. What does that have to do with anything? "David, we're supposed to be getting married right now. Can't this wait until after the ceremony?" "Please just answer the question," he said, and there was something in his tone that made me really look at his face. He didn't look like a concerned fiancé anymore. He looked like a doctor who was afraid of the answer he was about to receive. I tried to think back, counting days in my head. With everything that had been happening with the wedding and work, I hadn't been paying close attention to my cycle. "I'm not sure," I said slowly. "Maybe 6 weeks, 7, but that's not unusual for me when I'm stressed." The look David gave my mother confirmed something they had apparently already discussed, and the cold feeling in my stomach intensified into full-blown panic. "What's going on?" I demanded, sitting up despite David's protests. "Why are you looking at each other like that? What aren't you telling me?" It was Emma who spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, there's something we need to tell you. Something we found out this morning." "What are you talking about?" I looked around the room at the faces of the people I trusted most, and every one of them looked guilty and scared. "What could you possibly have found out this morning that's relevant to me fainting at my own wedding?" Emma looked at my mother, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "We got a call from Dr. Patterson's office this morning," Emma said, referring to my gynecologist. "Remember those routine blood tests you had done 2 weeks ago during your checkup?" I nodded, though I was struggling to understand why this was relevant to anything happening right now. "The results came back yesterday, but the office was closed for a staff training day." Emma continued. "Dr. Patterson called this morning because she wanted to reach you before the wedding." "Reach me about what?" I asked, though somewhere deep inside, I was beginning to understand what she was going to say. "Sarah," Emma said gently, "you're pregnant." The words hung in the air like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. "Pregnant?" I stared at Emma, waiting for her to say she was joking, that this was some kind of terrible mistake or misunderstanding. But her expression remained serious, and the silence in Father McKenna's office stretched on until it became unbearable. "That's impossible," I finally said, my voice sounding hollow and strange even to my own ears. "David and I have been careful. We've been using protection every single time. We talked about waiting until after the wedding, until his residency was more stable." David's face had gone completely pale, and he was staring at the floor rather than looking at me. That reaction sent a chill through my entire body that had nothing to do with the shock of the pregnancy news. "David," I said, reaching for his hand, "say something. Tell me this is going to be okay." He pulled his hand away from mine, and in that simple gesture I felt something fundamental shift between us. When he finally looked at me, his eyes held an expression I had never seen before, something that looked almost like guilt mixed with fear. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said quietly. "But not here, not now, not now," I repeated, incredulity creeping into my voice. David, I just found out I'm pregnant on our wedding day. When exactly do you think would be a better time to talk about this? My mother stepped forward, clearly trying to mediate. Maybe we should postpone the ceremony until you both have time to process this news. The guests will understand. Postpone. I sat up fully now, ignoring the lingering dizziness. Why would we postpone? Yes, this is unexpected, but people get pregnant. Married couples have babies. This doesn't change anything fundamental about us or our relationship. The look that passed between David and my mother made my blood run cold. There was knowledge there, some understanding that they shared and I was being excluded from. What is going on? I demanded, standing up despite the protests from everyone in the room. Why is everyone acting like this pregnancy is some kind of disaster? Why aren't you happy, David? Why aren't you at least surprised or excited or something other than looking like you want to run away? Emma moved closer to me, her hands reaching out as if to steady me. Sarah, maybe you should sit back down. You just fainted, and this is a lot to process. Stop treating me like I'm fragile, I snapped, surprising myself with the sharpness in my voice. I'm pregnant, not dying, and I want to know why my fiancé looks like he's seen a ghost and why everyone is acting like this is the worst news they've ever heard. David stood up slowly, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked like a stranger. The confident, caring man I had fallen in love with seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone who couldn't meet my eyes and appeared to be calculating his next words very carefully. Sarah, he began, then stopped and ran his hands through his hair. This complicates things. Complicates what things? I asked, though I was beginning to fear the answer. Father McKenna, who had been quietly observing from the corner, cleared his throat gently. Perhaps I should give you some privacy to discuss this. The congregation is waiting, but I can make an announcement that there's been a medical situation and we're delaying the ceremony. No, I said firmly, don't make any announcements yet. We're going to figure this out right now. After Father McKenna left, closing the door behind him, I turned to face David directly. Tell me what's going on, and don't you dare lie to me. David looked at my mother and Emma as if seeking support, but Emma crossed her arms and glared at him. Don't look at us. Sarah deserves the truth. What truth? I asked, my voice rising. What truth does everyone else seem to know except me? David sat back down heavily, his head in his hands. When he spoke, his voice was muffled and barely audible. Sarah, I've been meaning to talk to you about something, but the timing never seemed right. What kind of something? About us, about our future, about whether we're really ready for this kind of commitment. The words hit me like a physical blow. What are you saying? David, we're supposed to get married in 20 minutes. You're having doubts about our relationship now. It's not that simple, he said, finally looking up at me. There are things about my residency, about the demands of my career, about what the next few years are going to look like. We've talked about all of that, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. We've planned for it, we knew it would be challenging, but we decided we could handle it together. I know what we said, David replied, his voice getting stronger but not in a way that comforted me. But actually living it has been different than I expected. The hours, the pressure, the constant exhaustion. I barely have time for myself, let alone for a relationship. But you said you wanted this. I whispered. You proposed to me. You planned this wedding with me. I thought I wanted it, he said quietly. But I've realized that maybe I'm not ready for marriage. And now with a baby coming. The room spun around me, and I had to grab the back of a chair to steady myself. This couldn't be happening. This conversation couldn't be real. 6 months ago, David had been excited about our future together. He had talked about the house we would buy, the trips we would take once his residency was finished, the life we would build together. When did you realize this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. David was quiet for a long moment. It's been gradual. Over the past few months, the stress of residency, the wedding planning, everything just started feeling overwhelming. So you decided to wait until our wedding day to tell me. The anger in my voice surprised even me. I kept thinking the feelings would pass, that I was just stressed and tired. I didn't want to hurt you, or disappoint everyone, but then when Michael called this morning about the pregnancy results. Wait, I interrupted, my mind catching on something he had just said. Michael called you about the pregnancy results. How did Michael know about the pregnancy before I did? The guilty look that flashed across David's face told me everything I needed to know, but I needed to hear him say it. Sarah, Emma said gently, Dr. Patterson called the house this morning looking for you. You had already left for your hair appointment, so Mom took the message. When she heard what it was about, she panicked and called David to let him know. So you've all known about this for hours, I said, the betrayal cutting deeper than the pregnancy news itself. You've all been discussing my pregnancy and my life while I was getting ready for my wedding, completely oblivious. We didn't know how to tell you, my mother said, speaking for the first time since the pregnancy revelation. We knew it would be shocking, and we didn't want to ruin your wedding day. Well, mission accomplished on that front, I said bitterly. David stood up and began pacing the small office. This changes everything, Sarah. A baby means responsibility, financial pressure, sleepless nights. I'm already barely keeping up with residency. How am I supposed to be a husband and a father when I can't even take care of myself? So that's it, I asked, staring at him in disbelief. You're just going to walk away from me, from our relationship, from this baby? I'm not walking away, he said, though his tone wasn't convincing. I just think we need to slow down, think this through. Maybe postpone the wedding until we figure out what we want to do about the pregnancy. What we want to do about the pregnancy, I repeated, my voice dangerous. David, this is our baby, there's nothing to figure out, and there's a church full of people waiting for us to get married. Sarah, be realistic, he said, and I could hear frustration creeping into his voice. We're not ready for a baby. I'm in the middle of residency. You're trying to take over your family's business. We can barely coordinate our schedules now, let alone care for an infant.
The clinical way he was discussing our child made me feel sick. This was not the man I had fallen in love with, the one who had spent hours talking about our future family, who had cried when we watched movies with babies in them. I can't believe what I'm hearing, I said, backing toward the door. 6 hours ago you were excited to marry me, now you're talking about our baby like it's a problem to be solved. Don't you think this is a problem? David asked, his voice rising. Don't you think the timing is terrible? We haven't even been married yet, we're both dealing with career pressure, and now we're supposed to add a baby to the mix. People have been having babies for thousands of years without perfect timing. I shot back. And yes, it's unexpected, but that doesn't make it a disaster. Emma stepped between us, clearly sensing that the conversation was escalating beyond productive discussion. Maybe everyone should take a step back and breathe for a minute. No, I said firmly. I'm not taking a step back. I'm supposed to be getting married right now, and instead my fiancé is telling me he doesn't want to marry me or have a baby with me. I think I deserve a clear answer about where we stand. David stopped pacing and looked directly at me for the first time since the conversation began. I think we should postpone the wedding and take some time to figure out what we both really want. What I want is to marry the man I love and build a life together, whether that includes an unexpected baby or not, I said, tears finally starting to fall. What I want is for my partner to be excited about our future instead of looking for ways to escape from it. I'm not trying to escape, David said, but even he didn't sound convinced by his own words. Aren't you? I asked. Because from where I'm standing it looks like you're trying to find any excuse not to go through with this wedding. A knock on the door interrupted our argument. Father McKenna entered quietly, his expression concerned. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said gently, but the congregation is getting restless, and I need to know what you'd like me to tell them. The reality of the situation hit me fully for the first time. There were 200 people sitting in the church waiting for a wedding that might not happen. My grandparents had flown in from Florida. David's family had come from California. Friends had taken time off work, bought gifts, made arrangements to celebrate with us. Give us 5 more minutes, I said, my voice shaking. After Father McKenna left again, I turned to face David one more time. I need you to be completely honest with me right now. Do you want to marry me or not? David was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I don't know. Those 3 words shattered what was left of my heart. The man I had loved for 4 years, the man I had planned to spend my life with, couldn't even say yes when asked if he wanted to marry me. Then I think we have our answer, I said quietly. Sarah, wait, David said, reaching for me. Don't make any hasty decisions. We can work through this.
I stepped away from his outstretched hand. How do we work through you not knowing if you want to marry me? How do we work through you seeing our baby as a burden rather than a blessing? That's not fair, he said. This is just really bad timing. Life doesn't happen on a schedule, David, I replied. Real love means dealing with unexpected challenges together, not running away when things get complicated. My mother, who had been listening to our argument in silence, finally spoke up. Sarah, maybe David is right about taking some time to think. This is a big decision, and making it in an emotionally charged moment might not be wise. I stared at her in disbelief. Mom, whose side are you on here? I'm on your side, sweetheart, she said quickly. I just want you to be happy and make the right choice for your future. The right choice, I repeated. The right choice was supposed to be marrying the man I love and building a life together. Now everyone is acting like that's the wrong choice. Emma moved closer to me, her expression fierce. Sarah, you deserve someone who is absolutely certain they want to be with you. Someone who would be thrilled about having a baby with you, even if the timing isn't perfect. I am thrilled, David said defensively. I'm just scared and overwhelmed. There's a difference between being scared and not knowing if you want to get married. Emma shot back. One is normal pre-wedding nerves, and the other is a fundamental question about commitment. I looked around the room at the three people who had been most important in my life, and I realized that everything I had believed about my future had been built on a foundation that was crumbling beneath my feet. I need some air, I said, moving toward the door. Sarah, don't leave, David called after me. We need to talk about this more. I think we've talked enough, I replied, without turning around. I walked out of Father McKenna's office and into the corridor that led to the main sanctuary. Through the open doors, I could see the church full of people waiting for a bride who was no longer sure she wanted to be one. The flowers were perfect, the music was playing softly, and the altar looked exactly as I had imagined it would on my wedding day. But the groom standing at that altar didn't want to marry me, and I was carrying his child that he saw as a complication rather than a joy. I kept walking, past the sanctuary, through the vestibule where I had collapsed less than an hour ago, and out the front doors of the church. The afternoon sun was still shining, and the June air was warm and pleasant. Everything about the day was perfect, except for the most important thing of all. I sat down on the stone steps of the church, not caring if my wedding dress got dirty, and tried to process what had just happened. In the span of an hour, my entire life had been turned upside down. I had learned I was pregnant, discovered that my fiancé didn't want to marry me, and realized that the future I had been so certain about might not exist at all. The church doors opened behind me, and Emma sat down beside me without saying anything. We sat in silence for several minutes, watching cars drive by and people walking their dogs, the normal activities of a Saturday afternoon continuing while my world fell apart. What am I supposed to do now? I finally asked. I don't know, Emma admitted, but whatever you decide, I'll support you. 200 people are sitting in that church waiting for a wedding, I said, my voice flat and emotionless. Those people love you, Emma replied. They'll understand if you need to make a different choice. Will they? Will they understand that the bride decided not to get married because the groom admitted he doesn't know if he wants to marry her? Emma was quiet for a moment. The people who matter will understand. I thought about David's parents, who had been nothing but kind and welcoming to me. I thought about my grandparents, who had been excited for months about seeing me get married. I thought about all the friends who had traveled to be here, the vendors who had worked hard to make everything perfect, the money that had been spent on a celebration that might not happen. This is going to hurt so many people, I said. Staying in a marriage with someone who doesn't really want to be there would hurt more people in the long run, Emma pointed out. Including any children you might have. The mention of children brought my hand instinctively to my stomach. There was a baby growing inside me, a tiny life that would depend on me for everything. The thought was terrifying and amazing at the same time. I'm going to be a mother, I said, out loud, as if saying it would help me believe it. You're going to be an amazing mother, Emma said firmly. With or without David. The church doors opened again, and this time it was my father who joined us on the steps. His expression was grim, and I could tell he had been informed about the situation. How are you holding up, princess? He asked.
settling down on my other side. "I've been better," I said with a weak attempt at humor. "Your mother filled me in on what happened," he said carefully. "I'm sorry you're going through this. Dad, what should I do?" I asked, feeling like a little girl again, seeking guidance from the parent who had always seemed to have all the answers. "What does your heart tell you?" he asked. Instead of giving me a direct answer. "My heart is confused," I admitted. "I love David, but I don't know if I can marry someone who doesn't know if they want to marry me." "That sounds like pretty clear guidance to me," my father said gently. We sat in silence for a few more minutes before I realized that a decision had to be made. The guests couldn't wait indefinitely, and it wasn't fair to keep everyone in suspense while I tried to figure out my life. "I think I need to go back in there and end this," I said, finally. "Are you sure?" Emma asked. "No," I said, honestly, "but I'm sure that I can't marry someone who isn't sure they want to marry me. And I'm sure that our baby deserves parents who are committed to building a family together, not one who sees them as an inconvenience." I stood up, brushing off my wedding dress, and walked back into the church with Emma and my father flanking me. The conversations in the sanctuary died down as people noticed my return, and I could feel hundreds of eyes on me as I made my way toward the altar. David was still standing there with his groomsmen, and his face showed a mixture of hope and resignation when he saw me. Father McKenna approached me as I reached the front of the church. "What would you like me to tell everyone?" he asked. Quietly. I looked out at the congregation, at all the faces of people who had come to celebrate what they thought would be one of the happiest days of my life. I saw David's parents in the front row, looking confused and concerned. I saw my grandparents, my cousins, my childhood friends, my coworkers. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward to address the crowd myself. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, my voice stronger than I felt. "Your presence means more to me than you know." However, after some unexpected news and important conversations, David and I have decided that we need to postpone our wedding. A murmur ran through the congregation, and I could see shock and confusion on many faces. "I know this is disappointing and confusing," I continued. "But sometimes life takes unexpected turns, and we need to be honest about what's best for everyone involved. The reception will still happen, and you're all welcome to join us for dinner and dancing. Just think of it as a celebration of family and friendship instead of a wedding." I turned to look at David one last time. He was standing frozen at the altar, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said to him, quietly enough that only he could hear. Then I walked back down the aisle, still in my wedding dress, toward an uncertain future that I would now be facing as a single mother-to-be. The weeks that followed were a blur of well-meaning visitors, returned wedding gifts, and sleepless nights spent questioning every decision I had ever made. I moved back into my childhood bedroom temporarily, unable to face the apartment I had shared with David or the lake house rental we had planned to move into after our honeymoon. My mother tiptoed around me like I was made of glass, bringing me tea and homemade soup that I barely touched. Emma had taken extended leave from her job in Portland to stay with me, sleeping on the twin bed across from mine just like when we were teenagers. She never once said I had made the right choice or the wrong choice. She simply existed beside me as I tried to figure out how to rebuild a life I had never planned for. David had tried calling numerous times in the first week, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to confused to angry. I deleted each one without listening to the end. Michael had stopped by once, bearing what he called an olive branch from David, but I refused to see him. Whatever David had to say, he had already said it clearly enough on our non-wedding day. Patterson confirmed the pregnancy during an appointment that felt surreal and clinical after everything that had happened. 8 weeks along, she told me, due in early February. Healthy heartbeat, normal hormone levels, no signs of complications from the fainting episode. She asked gently about my support system and whether I had considered my options, but I told her firmly that I was keeping the baby. That decision, at least, felt clear and right in a way that nothing else did. The hardest part was facing the community that had watched me grow up. Millbrook was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, and the story of the canceled wedding had spread quickly. Most people were kind, offering sympathetic smiles and avoiding direct questions, but I could feel their curiosity and pity whenever I went to the grocery store or post office. Mrs. Henderson from the bank had cornered me at the pharmacy, her voice dripping with false concern as she asked how I was holding up and whether there was anything she could do. I knew she was fishing for details to share with her bridge club, and I gave her nothing more than a polite thank you before escaping to the vitamin aisle. 3 weeks after the cancelled wedding, I finally returned to work at Mitchell & Associates. My father had been handling my clients during my absence, but I could see the strain in his eyes, and knew I needed to get back to some semblance of normal life. The office felt familiar and comforting, filled with family photos, and the scent of my mother's coffee brewing in the break room. My first client meeting was with the Andersons, a young couple looking to buy their first home. As I showed them through a charming colonial on Maple Street, listening to them discuss paint colors and nursery placement, I felt a sharp pang of loss for the future I had planned with David. We had looked at houses together, dreaming about which room would be his office and where we would plant a garden. "Are you all right, Miss Mitchell?" Mrs. Anderson asked, noticing that I had stopped talking mid-sentence while staring at the master bedroom. "Just thinking about the possibilities," I said quickly, forcing a professional smile back onto my face. Working helped fill the empty hours, but it also brought its own challenges. Several clients asked about the wedding, having heard various versions of what had happened. I developed a standard response about needing to postpone due to unexpected circumstances that usually satisfied their curiosity without inviting follow-up questions. My parents were supportive but clearly struggling with how to help me. My father threw himself into teaching me more about the business side of real estate, perhaps hoping that professional achievement could somehow compensate for personal disappointment. My mother alternated between treating me like an invalid and pretending nothing had changed, neither approach particularly helpful. It was during a particularly difficult evening, when I had spent an hour crying over a commercial for baby food, that Emma suggested I might benefit from talking to someone professional. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to David despite the shared surname, was a therapist who specialized in life transitions and had an office in the next town over. The first session was awkward and painful. Dr. Chen asked probing questions about my relationship with David, my expectations for marriage, and my feelings about becoming a single mother. I found myself defending choices I wasn't even sure I believed in anymore, explaining why calling off the wedding had been the right decision, while simultaneously wondering if I had been too hasty. "It sounds like you're grieving multiple losses," Dr. Chen observed during our third session. "The relationship you thought you had, the future you had planned, and the person you thought David was. But I chose to end it," I protested.
"You can't grieve something you decided to walk away from." "Of course you can," she said gently. "Loss is loss, regardless of whether it was your choice or someone else's." That perspective helped me understand why I felt so empty and confused. I wasn't just dealing with a breakup, I was mourning the death of a dream that had sustained me for years. As my pregnancy progressed and began to show, I faced new challenges and unexpected joys. The morning sickness that had contributed to my fainting on the wedding day gradually subsided, replaced by a growing awareness of the life developing inside me. I started taking prenatal vitamins, reading pregnancy books, and slowly beginning to imagine myself as a mother. The first time I felt the baby move, I was sitting in my car after a client meeting, checking messages on my phone. The sensation was so subtle I almost missed it, like a butterfly landing gently on my skin from the inside. I sat perfectly still, waiting to feel it again, and when I did, I burst into tears of joy and wonder. For the first time since the cancelled wedding, I felt genuinely excited about something. This baby was mine, completely and unconditionally mine, and no one could take that away from me, or decide they weren't ready for the responsibility. I started attending a prenatal yoga class in Hartford, driving the 40 minutes each way for the anonymity of being around strangers who knew nothing about my story. The other women in the class were all married, some attending with their husbands, others comparing notes about nursery themes and baby shower plans. I felt like an outsider among them, but the physical movement and breathing exercises helped quiet the constant anxiety that had become my unwelcome companion. One evening after yoga class, I stopped at a baby store to look at cribs and found myself overwhelmed by the sheer number of choices. Convertible cribs, traditional cribs, cribs with changing tables attached. How was I supposed to know what my baby would need? I stood in the middle of the store feeling completely lost until a saleswoman approached. "First baby?" she asked kindly, and when I nodded, she smiled. "It's overwhelming, isn't it? The good news is that babies really don't need as much as the stores want you to think they do." She walked me through the basics, helping me understand what was essential and what was marketing hype. By the time I left, I had ordered a simple white crib and felt more confident about my ability to prepare for this baby on my own. That confidence was tested a few days later when I ran into David's mother at the grocery store. Helen Chen looked smaller than I remembered, and her usual warm smile was replaced by an expression of deep sadness when she saw me. "Sarah," she said softly, approaching my cart with obvious hesitation, "how are you feeling?" "I'm doing well, thank you," I replied, instinctively placing a protective hand over my now visible bump. "I've been thinking about you so much," she continued, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm so sorry about everything that happened. I had no idea David was having doubts." "It's not your fault, Helen," I said, and I meant it. "David is an adult who made his own choices." "Have you heard from him at all?" she asked, hopefully. "No, and I don't expect to," I said firmly. "We've both moved on." Helen looked like she wanted to say more, but I could see her struggling with divided loyalties between her son and me. "Sarah, I want you to know that if you ever need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call me. This baby is my grandchild too." The unexpected kindness in her voice nearly broke my composure. "Thank you," I managed to say. "That means more than you know." After she walked away, I stood in the cereal aisle fighting back tears. Helen's words had touched something I hadn't realized I was mourning. The loss of the extended family I had thought I was gaining through marriage. David's parents had welcomed me warmly, and I had been looking forward to holiday gatherings and birthday celebrations where this baby would be surrounded by loving grandparents, aunts and uncles. Now my child would grow up, knowing they had family on their father's side, but having no relationship with them. The unfairness of that reality made me angry at David all over again. His choice to walk away hadn't just affected me, it had deprived our child of half their heritage. That anger motivated me to start making concrete plans for single motherhood. I researched daycare options, calculated my maternity leave benefits, and began the process of converting the guest room in my apartment into a nursery. Emma helped me paint the walls a cheerful yellow and assemble furniture, turning what had been a storage space into a warm, welcoming room for my baby. As I hung tiny clothes in the closet and arranged stuffed animals on shelves, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing since the wedding debacle. This child would be loved and wanted, even if they hadn't been planned. I would give them the stability and security that their father had been unwilling to provide. The baby shower my mother and Emma organized was a small affair, just close family and a few friends, but it filled my heart with gratitude. Watching my grandmother knit tiny booties and seeing my cousins argue over who would be the favorite aunt reminded me that family comes in many forms. My child would be surrounded by love, even if the configuration looked different than I had originally planned. During my 7th month of pregnancy, I received an unexpected phone call at work. Michael Rodriguez's name appeared on my phone, and after a moment of hesitation, I answered. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling," he began nervously. "I know you probably don't want to hear from anyone connected to David, but I felt like I needed to reach out." "What do you want, Michael?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "I wanted to apologize," he said, "for my part in what happened on your wedding day. I should have refused to make that call about David being sick. I should have told him to be honest with you from the beginning." "You were being a loyal friend," I said. "I don't blame you for that." "Maybe, but loyalty shouldn't include helping someone lie to the person they're supposed to love most," he replied. "David asked me to call because he was hoping you'd find out about the pregnancy after the ceremony, when it would be too late to change anything." This revelation hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "He thought if you were already married when you found out about the baby, you'd be more likely to go through with everything.
He was hoping to trap you into a situation you couldn't back out of. The calculating coldness of that plan took my breath away. David hadn't just been having doubts about our relationship, he had been actively manipulating the situation to force the outcome he wanted. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, when I could speak again. "Because I've been carrying the guilt for months," Michael said, "and because I think you deserve to know who you really dodged a bullet with. The David I've been seeing since the wedding isn't someone I recognize anymore. He's bitter and resentful, blaming everyone but himself for how things turned out." After I hung up, I sat in my office chair feeling vindicated and heartbroken at the same time. Learning about David's deception confirmed that I had made the right choice, but it also revealed the depth of his betrayal. The man I had loved hadn't just gotten cold feet, he had been willing to manipulate me into a marriage he didn't want. That evening I called Dr. Chen and scheduled an emergency session. I needed help processing this new information, and the complex emotions it brought up. "How does it feel to know that your instincts were right?" she asked, during our session. "Validating and devastating at the same time," I said honestly. "I'm glad I trusted my gut, but I'm heartbroken that someone I loved was capable of that kind of deception." "It's possible to feel both things simultaneously," she assured me. "You can be proud of your strength while still grieving the loss of the relationship you thought you had." As my due date approached, I felt increasingly ready to meet my baby and start the next chapter of my life. I had created a support network of family and friends, established my financial independence, and prepared both practically and emotionally for single motherhood. Most importantly, I had learned to trust my own judgment again. The night my labor started, Emma drove me to the hospital while my parents followed behind us. As contractions intensified, and I realized I was about to become a mother, I felt no regret about facing this moment without David. This baby deserved a parent who was fully committed to loving them, and I was ready to be exactly that. When my daughter was born at 6:23 a.m., on a snowy February morning, the first thing I noticed was her perfect tiny fingers, and the way she immediately calmed when I spoke to her. She recognized my voice already, this little person who had been my constant companion for 9 months. "She's beautiful," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her new niece. "She's perfect," I agreed, overwhelmed with love for this tiny human who had changed everything about my life in the most wonderful way possible. I named her Grace Elizabeth Mitchell, Grace for the unexpected blessing she represented, and Elizabeth for my grandmother, who had always shown me what strength looked like. As I held her for the first time, I knew with absolute certainty that every difficult moment of the past year had been worth it to get to this one. My daughter would grow up knowing she was wanted, loved, and valued. She would never question whether her mother was ready for the responsibility of raising her. And someday when she was old enough to understand, I would tell her the story of how her birth taught me what unconditional love really means. Grace Elizabeth Mitchell was 3 months old when David finally showed up at my door. I had just finished giving her a bath, and she was sleepy and content in my arms when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw him standing on my porch, holding a bouquet of flowers, and looking more nervous than I had ever seen him during our 4 years together. For a moment I considered pretending I wasn't home. Grace and I had settled into a peaceful routine of feeding schedules, afternoon walks, and quiet evenings, where I read to her while she slept against my chest. The last thing I wanted was for David's presence to disrupt the life I had carefully built for my daughter and myself. But curiosity won out over caution, and I opened the door while keeping the chain latch secured. "Hello, Sarah," he said quietly, his eyes immediately going to the baby in my arms. "She's beautiful. What do you want, David?" I asked, making no move to invite him inside. "I came to apologize," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and to meet my daughter, if you'll let me." "Your daughter," I repeated, anger flaring in my chest. "You gave up any claim to being her father when you walked away from us." "I know I made terrible mistakes," he said quickly, "but she's still my child, Sarah. Biologically, legally, I have rights." The mention of legal rights made my blood run cold. I had hoped that David's absence meant he had no interest in being part of Grace's life. The thought of custody battles and court dates while trying to navigate new motherhood was overwhelming. Rights you chose to abandon, I said firmly. You made it clear you weren't ready for fatherhood. I was scared and overwhelmed, David said, stepping closer to the door. I thought I wasn't ready, but seeing her now, knowing she exists in the world. You can see her from where you're standing, I said, not softening my tone, but that doesn't mean you get to waltz back into our lives whenever it's convenient for you. Grace stirred in my arms, making the soft cooing sounds that never failed to melt my heart. David's face lit up at the sound, and I could see genuine emotion in his eyes, for the first time since our wedding day. Please, Sarah, he said, just give me a chance to explain. Let me tell you what I've learned about myself these past few months. Against my better judgment, I found myself unlocking the chain and stepping aside to let him enter. Maybe it was the exhaustion of caring for a newborn alone, or maybe it was the small part of me that still remembered loving this man, but I decided to hear what he had to say. David followed me into the living room, his eyes taking in the baby swing, the bouncy seat, and the colorful playmat that had transformed my once pristine space into something warm and lived in. He looked around with an expression of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe that this domestic scene existed. The apartment looks different, he said, settling onto the edge of the couch while I remained standing, Grace still in my arms. Children change things, I said simply. They require you to reorganize your priorities and your space. I've been in therapy, David said without preamble. Individual counseling and some sessions with my parents to work through family dynamics. Martinez helped me understand that my fear of commitment wasn't really about our relationship or even about becoming a father. I waited for him to continue, not trusting myself to speak without saying something I might regret. It was about my own insecurities, he went on. About not feeling worthy of happiness or stability. My parents sacrificed so much to give me opportunities, and I've always felt this pressure to be perfect, to never make mistakes that would disappoint them or waste their efforts. So you decided to make the biggest mistake possible by walking away from people who loved you? I asked, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. I realize now that's exactly what I did, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I sabotaged the best thing in my life, because I was afraid of not being good enough for it. Grace had fallen asleep against my shoulder, her tiny fist curled around a strand of my hair. The weight of her small body was comforting and grounding, reminding me that whatever David had to say, my primary responsibility was to protect this innocent child. What exactly do you want from me, David? I asked. Forgiveness, another chance. Joint custody. I want to be her father, he said simply. I want to support you both financially and emotionally. I want to be part of her life and yours, if you'll have me. And what happens the next time you get scared? I asked. What happens when she's sick in the middle of the night, or when she's teething and crying for hours, or when you realize that parenting is harder than you imagined? Do you walk away again? I won't, he said firmly. I know you have no reason to believe me, but I've changed, Sarah. Losing you, losing the chance to be there when she was born, missing the first 3 months of her life, has taught me what really matters. I studied his face, looking for signs of the uncertainty and fear that had characterized our last conversation. What I saw instead was a man who looked older, more serious, and genuinely remorseful. You can't just show up here and expect everything to go back to the way it was, I said quietly. Too much has happened, too much trust has been broken. I'm not asking for everything to go back. David said. I'm asking for a chance to build something new. Something better than what we had before. Grace stirred slightly, and I adjusted my position to keep her comfortable. The simple act of caring for her needs reminded me of all the nights I had done this alone, all the decisions I had made without input from her father, all the milestones he had missed because of his own fears. She doesn't know you, I said, looking down at my sleeping daughter. You're a stranger to her. I know, David said, and I could hear the pain in his voice, but babies learn fast. If you give me the chance, I can earn her trust. I can earn yours too. My trust isn't something you can earn back quickly, I warned him.
And it definitely isn't something you're entitled to just because you've decided you're ready to be a father now.
I understand that, he said. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness or for us to pick up where we left off. I'm asking for the opportunity to prove that I can be the man and the father you both deserve. I walked to the window, looking out at the street where children were playing in their front yards under the watchful eyes of their parents. The scene looked so normal, so stable, and I wondered if Grace would ever have that kind of traditional family structure, or if she would grow up navigating the complications of divorced parents and custody arrangements. If you want to be part of her life, there would have to be rules, I said finally, not turning around to face him. Whatever you think is best, David said quickly. Supervised visits at first, I continued. I need to see that you're serious about this commitment before I'm comfortable leaving her alone with you. That's fair. Child support regardless of how much time you spend with her, I added. Being a parent isn't just about the fun parts, it's about financial responsibility too. Of course, I turned back to face him, Grace still sleeping peacefully in my arms, and absolutely no pressure on me to reconcile romantically. This is about her, not about us. David's face fell slightly at this condition, but he nodded. I understand. Though I hope that someday, when I've proven myself to both of you, you might consider giving us another chance. Don't hold your breath, I said firmly. I'm not the same person who was devastated when you walked away. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought, and I won't settle for anything less than someone who's absolutely certain they want to be with me. I am certain now, David said quietly. Now I repeated, but you were certain when you proposed to me too. Certainty that changes with circumstances isn't really certainty at all. We were interrupted by Grace waking up and beginning to fuss. Her feeding schedule was precise, and I knew she was hungry. Without thinking, I moved toward the kitchen to prepare her bottle, and David followed. Can I hold her while you get her bottle ready? He asked, hesitantly. I paused, looking down at my daughter's scrunched-up face as she worked herself up to a full cry. This moment felt significant somehow, the first time her father would hold her, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. She's hungry and probably won't be very happy, I warned. I'd still like to try, David said, extending his arms. Reluctantly, I transferred Grace to his arms, showing him how to support her head and neck. She continued crying, but David's face lit up with wonder as he looked down at her. She's so small, he marveled, and perfect. She's actually quite big for her age, I said, warming the bottle and testing the temperature on my wrist. Pediatrician says she's in the 90th percentile for height. She gets that from my side, David said with a small smile. My father is 6'4". The casual way he claimed her genetics irritated me, but I bit back my response. If David was going to be part of Grace's life, I would have to get used to sharing these details with him. When the bottle was ready, I showed David how to feed her, guiding his hands to the correct angle, and explaining how to tell when she needed to be burped. Watching him learn these basic parenting skills that I had been mastering for months was surreal and emotionally complicated. She's looking at me, David said softly, his voice filled with awe. Babies her age can focus on faces that are close to them, I explained. She's trying to figure out who you are. I'm your daddy, David whispered to Grace, and I felt my heart clench at the tenderness in his voice. Despite my anger and mistrust, I couldn't deny that there was something beautiful about watching Grace's father hold her for the first time. She seemed calm in his arms, studying his face with the serious concentration that babies bring to new experiences. After she finished eating, David attempted to burp her with my guidance, looking proud when he succeeded in producing a tiny burp that made Grace's eyes flutter with contentment. This is amazing, he said, still holding her as she settled back into sleep. I can't believe I almost missed all of this. You did miss it, I reminded him. You missed her birth, her first smile, all the nights when she was colicky and couldn't sleep. You missed me figuring out how to be a mother while recovering from childbirth and dealing with the emotional trauma of our canceled wedding. David's face crumpled with guilt and regret. I know I can't change that. I know I can't make up for not being here when you needed me most. But I'm here now, and I want to be here for everything that comes next. Being here now isn't enough, I said, though my voice was gentler than before. Consistency is what children need. Reliability. They need to know that the adults in their lives will show up, especially when things get difficult. I'll show up, David promised.
Every day, if you'll let me, we'll start with once a week, I said, making the decision in real time. Saturday afternoons for 2 hours. Here at my apartment where I can supervise. Thank you, David said, relief evident in his voice. This isn't forgiveness, I clarified. This is me giving you the opportunity to prove you've changed. But the moment I feel like you're not fully committed, or if I sense that you're causing Grace any instability, these visits end. I understand, David said reluctantly, handing Grace back to me when she began to stir again. What about financial support? We spent the next hour working out practical arrangements. David would provide monthly support that covered daycare, medical expenses, and contributions to Grace's college fund. He would be added to her emergency contact list at daycare, but would need my permission before making any decisions about her care or activities. As David prepared to leave, he lingered at the door, clearly reluctant to go. Can I bring her something next week? He asked. A toy or outfit? Nothing too elaborate, I said, and nothing that makes noise. I've learned to value quiet toys above all else. David laughed, a sound that reminded me of happier times, despite everything that had happened between us. I'll remember that. After he left, I sat in my rocking chair with Grace, processing the unexpected turn my day had taken. I felt emotionally drained, but also cautiously hopeful that maybe eventually, Grace would have a father who was present and engaged in her life. The following Saturday, David arrived promptly at 2 o'clock, with a simple wooden rattle and a children's book about farm animals. He seemed nervous but determined, and I watched from across the room as he sat on the floor, with Grace, reading to her in a gentle voice, and shaking the rattle to capture her attention. Over the following weeks, our Saturday routine became established. David would arrive with a small gift, spend 2 hours playing with Grace and learning her preferences, and leave with detailed questions about her schedule and development. He asked about everything from her sleep patterns to her pediatrician appointments, clearly trying to educate himself about child development. One Saturday in early summer, I noticed that Grace had begun to recognize David's voice and would turn her head toward him when he spoke. The realization that she was forming a bond with her father brought complex emotions I wasn't prepared for. She knows you, I said, watching as Grace reached for David's finger and held on tightly. I think she does, David said, his voice thick with emotion. Sometimes I catch her staring at me like she's trying to memorize my face. That's exactly what she's doing, I confirmed. Babies study the faces of people who are important to them. As spring turned to summer, David's visits became less supervised. I would spend part of the time in another room, trusting him to care for Grace, while remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. He proved himself capable of changing diapers, giving bottles, and entertaining her with age-appropriate activities. One afternoon, I returned from folding laundry to find David sitting on the couch with Grace lying on his chest, both of them sound asleep. The sight of my daughter sleeping peacefully on her father's chest created an ache in my heart that I hadn't expected. This was what I had dreamed of during my pregnancy, moments of domestic tranquility, where Grace would be safe and loved by both her parents. Seeing it happen now felt like a gift and a loss simultaneously. They look comfortable, Emma observed from behind me. She had been visiting more frequently, curious about David's reintegration into our lives and protective of both Grace and me. They do, I agreed quietly. How are you feeling about all this? Emma asked, as we moved to the kitchen to give them privacy. Conflicted, I admitted. I'm glad Grace has a chance to know her father, but I'm terrified he'll disappoint her the way he disappointed me. But if he doesn't, Emma prompted. If he really has changed and becomes the father she deserves, then I'll be grateful, I said honestly. But that doesn't mean I'll ever trust him with my heart again. By Grace's first birthday, David had become a reliable presence in her life. He attended her pediatrician appointments, helped plan her birthday party, and contributed not just financially but emotionally to her care. She clearly adored him, clapping her hands when he arrived and crying when he left. At her birthday party, surrounded by family and friends in the backyard of my parents' house, I watched David chase Grace around the lawn while she took unsteady steps between family members. She had taken her first steps just the week before, and David had been there to witness it during one of his visits. He's good with her, my mother observed, joining me at the picnic table where I was serving cake. He is,
I agreed, surprised by how much that pleased me. And how are things between you two? She asked carefully. Cordial, I said, respectful, focused on Grace, but nothing more. I watched David scoop Grace up and spin her around, both of them laughing with pure joy. No, Mom, nothing more. That evening, after the guests had gone home, and Grace was sleeping off her sugar crash, David helped me clean up the party supplies. We worked in comfortable silence, a rhythm we had developed over months of co-parenting. Thank you for today, David said as we finished loading the dishwasher. For letting me be part of it. You're her father, I said simply. Of course you should be part of her birthday. Not all women would have been as generous as you've been, David said quietly. I know I didn't deserve a second chance. You didn't get a second chance with me, I corrected him, you got a first chance with her. Those are two very different things. David nodded, understanding the distinction. Is there any possibility that someday? No, I said firmly. But not unkindly. David, you're becoming a wonderful father, and I'm grateful for that. But the trust that exists between romantic partners is different from the trust between co-parents. What we had is gone, and I've made peace with that. I understand, he said, though I could see disappointment in his eyes. As Grace grew into a curious toddler, our co-parenting arrangement evolved. David now took her for entire afternoons, and eventually overnight visits. She had a bedroom at his apartment, and a collection of toys that lived there permanently. Watching her navigate between two homes broke my heart sometimes, but she adapted with the resilience that children possess. On Grace's second birthday, David brought a date to the party. Jennifer was a pediatric nurse he had met at the hospital, and she was clearly nervous about meeting Grace and me. I was surprised by how little jealousy I felt watching David with another woman. Instead, I felt relief that he was building a life that didn't revolve around trying to win me back. She seems nice, Emma commented as we watched Jennifer patiently help Grace with a puzzle. She does, I agreed, and she's good with children, which is what matters. Are you dating anyone? Emma asked, a question she posed regularly, but which I consistently deflected. I'm focusing on Grace and my career, I said, giving my standard response. You can focus on those things, and still have a personal life, Emma pointed out. Grace won't be little forever. The truth was that I had been on a few dates over the past year, set up by well-meaning friends, who thought it was time for me to move on. But none of the men I met could compete with the peace and fulfillment I had found in single motherhood. My life felt complete in a way it never had when I was desperately trying to make things work with David. 3 years after that disastrous wedding day, I stood in my newly expanded office at Mitchell & Associates, now serving as the company's vice president, while my father gradually stepped back from daily operations. Grace was thriving in preschool, David had proposed to Jennifer, and I had built a life that was fuller and more satisfying than anything I had imagined possible during those dark months after calling off my wedding. The phone on my desk rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my assistant, letting me know that my 4 o'clock appointment had arrived. A young couple looking to buy their first home, eager and nervous and full of dreams about the future they would build together. As I walked to the conference room to meet them, I thought about the advice I would give them about choosing a home that would grow with their family, about the importance of good schools and safe neighborhoods. I wouldn't tell them that sometimes the life you plan doesn't work out, and that sometimes the life you don't plan turns out to be exactly what you needed. Some lessons people have to learn for themselves, just as I had learned that strength comes not from having everything work out perfectly, but from adapting when everything falls apart. That evening, Grace and I were reading bedtime stories when she looked up at me with her father's dark eyes and asked, "Mommy, why don't you and Daddy live in the same house?" It was a question I had been preparing for, knowing it would come eventually. Because sometimes grown-ups are better parents when they live in different houses, I explained. But you know that both Daddy and I love you very much, right? I know, Grace said, snuggling closer to me, and I love you both too. As I tucked her into bed and kissed her goodnight, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've made the right choices, even when those choices were painful at the time. Grace was growing up secure in the love of both her parents, even if that love was expressed from separate homes. Sometimes the blood test results that arrive just in time don't reveal a medical crisis or a hidden secret.
Sometimes they simply reveal a new beginning that you never saw coming, a future that's different from what you planned, but somehow exactly what you needed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.